Lucita, now my daughter will be living with her new husband. I hope you don't mind." The bride froze at the impudence of her mother-in-law and went to the notary. Luke changed clothes and left the dressing room. If not for the delays at work, she would have had enough time and energy for everything. But recently her boss had become increasingly insolent, often keeping her in the workshop for an hour or even two. Luca wearily slung her bag over her shoulder and left the sports club. It was nice outside. Early October had turned out warm, so she decided to take a walk. Here and there, groups of young people were already sitting near the entrances. Luca was thinking about the upcoming competitions. In essence, she had achieved everything she wanted in her sport. Now she attended classes more to maintain her form than to win awards. She heard some commotion, then shouts. She headed in that direction. Luca didn't often get involved in such altercations, but when her intuition called, she followed. Right now, Luca had a strong feeling that she needed to intervene. "Hey," shouted the girl when she saw that two guys were holding on to some guy while a third was hitting him. "Leave him alone." "Get lost," cursed one of them, swinging and striking the guy in the face with all his strength. Luca swiftly found herself in the midst of the fray. Her right leg soared into the air, and one of the thugs landed on the ground. She turned sharply, and within 5 meters, the second thug hit the ground quickly. "Let him go," she ordered the one still standing. Luca approached him. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed movement. Before the two could reach her, she seemed to launch into the air. Her spinning leg first struck one in the head, then the second received a blow to the stomach. "Spat," the ringleader said. "I'll catch you," he gestured, and all three hurried away. Luca went up to the victim. The guy was trying to stop the bleeding. His lip was badly cut. "Are you okay?" the girl asked with concern, handing him a tissue. "Nothing broken." "I think I'm fine," he barely managed to say. "Thanks." The stranger tried to smile, but the pain wouldn't allow it. "I'll walk you," Luca said, picking up her bag. "Which way are you going?" "I feel like taking a stroll anyway." "Not only did you save me, but now you want to walk me home?" The stranger couldn't help but laugh. "It's all a bit unusual. It's just a standard that men are stronger. Besides, I practice martial arts." "And you don't believe me?" "There's a colossal difference. Is it karate?" the guy asked with interest. "They fight with their legs. Right legs are used in many Eastern arts. But you're right. Today it was karate." She smiled. "I've been doing it professionally since I was 5. Then there was taekwondo and woo, but I still prefer the latter." "I have Jean-Claude Van Damme in my mind." When his master was stretching him between two trees, the guy remarked. He really wanted to talk to the girl, but his swollen lip wouldn't allow it. "And I'm just a sorry programmer. My brain is the only thing that works," he said. "Sorry, I didn't introduce myself." "Timoteo," Lucita said. "Well, I'm not an athlete by profession either." She laughed. "You might laugh, but I'm actually a pastry chef." "How do you manage to combine that?" The guy looked at her in amazement. "I bet you can whip cream with your hands and feet simultaneously." Lucita chuckled cheerfully. Her companion seemed to be a very humorous person. "I'm sorry, I can't talk anymore," Timoteo said. "Besides, we've arrived. Allow me to meet with you in a few days. I would really like to invite you to a cafe." "Agreed," Luca smiled. "Take care of yourself. I don't think those idiots will bother you again, but you never know, you know. It's easy to attack when there are 3 of them, and only one of me." Timoteo sighed. "I managed to hit one, but when the other 2 ran up to me, it wasn't so easy to get away." Luca happily headed home. She enjoyed moments like these. Of course, she understood that not everyone could or should be helped. She always trusted her intuition. It was already quite dark, but Luca fearlessly walked through the entire city. Despite her tiredness, training gave her inner drive. She felt internal freedom and wanted to embrace everything. It might seem strange to others why a 25-year-old woman had never had serious relationships, but Luca was never bothered by that question. She could sense men. It wasn't about physical strength. Luca had no intention of sparring with her future husband. Moreover, Eastern martial arts gave her more inner balance than a desire to attack. For her, it was a life philosophy of harmonizing her mind through her body. Over time, Luca learned to concentrate energy in her hands and feet. She even felt as though she wasn't touching her opponent when they flew away from her. "Luca, you have a rare ability to work with energy," an old Chinese man once said to her during a master class she attended. "Use it only for good, for yourself and others." So all her youth, the girl disappeared into the gym and at competitions. It was a period when she wanted to prove something, to assert herself. Luke quickly accumulated titles and medals. By the age of 20, she clearly felt that this wasn't the most important thing. She became more interested in philosophy and secret knowledge preserved by the masters. From 20 to 24, she constantly visited outstanding teachers, trying to absorb their wisdom. Only a year ago did the girl, you could say, embark on a free swim. She spent more time at home, occasionally going to the sports club. So it was only when she met Timoteo that Luke realized a new stage was beginning in her life. "Sorry, I'm still handsome," the guy Luca heard from above as she waited for her new acquaintance. Timoteo's lips were still in a sorry state. a bruise adorning his left eye, but the guy was smiling enough. Perhaps it was his positivity that convinced Luca he was the one. The young people had a great evening together. They enjoyed each other's company. Luke mostly interacted with her clubmates. She never managed to make friends in school or college. Now at least they've increased my salary a bit. Luca talked about her job. In the first year I was basically working for free. As my boss said back then, I needed to gain experience. Luca, it's easier for you to attract students than to work in the culinary field, Odo said. From the outside it seems that now there's a wave and Eastern martial arts are in high demand. But unfortunately, it's just an illusion, she sadly replied. Boxing or wrestling still dominate. From an intellectual development perspective, they're completely meaningless. There's no work with energy or ways to accumulate it, just pure physical strength, but it doesn't give anything. Yet people still deceive themselves with this illusion and send their children to boxing or judo. How many boxers have crippled people because they can't control the force of their blows? I have a few students, 2 of them adults I teach at my club, but it doesn't go beyond that. My work is a bit easier. Timoteo looked at the girl. I always have it. I work from home, but our environment is unsettled. In a couple of months, I plan to rent a separate place for myself. My older sister's children often visit us. Their parents disappear somewhere or are at work. So I have to be both a nanny and create programs at the same time. And since my nephews are very restless, all you hear is something falling, breaking, or one hitting the other. In general, it's impossible to work like this. After meeting Lucita, Timoteo walked home and thought about what they had talked about. The guy understood that living like he was becoming unbearable. His mother and sister didn't give him any breathing room. He would have left them a year ago, but the latter persuaded his mother, and she gave her son a real scandal. You know, Timoteo, do you realize how much money we've invested in your education? She shouted. We could just as well have given half of it to Donna. So, nothing to worry about, just bear with it. Who will take care of the kids? I'm at work, and so is their father. Poor Donna, she's all alone working 2 jobs. What about her husband then? Timoteo tried to grasp onto something, even if it was just a jest. Doesn't he work too? Why do they need so much money? Don't be smart, his father snapped at him. When you have your own family and kids, then we'll see. You'll be whining, help me, give me money, watch my kids, he sneered. You're a hero now. Timoteo had nothing to say. From the very first day he started working, he had been giving a large part of his earnings to the family budget. If it hadn't been for a serious goal Timoteo set for himself back then, he wouldn't have cared. The guy really wanted to get into a promising company, but it wasn't easy. The salary there was 2.5 times higher than usual, but so were the demands. If only they'd hire me, he dreamed. Then I'd secure a good future for myself quickly. Buy an apartment and a car. Yes, sighed Timoteo. After the conversation with Lucita, he wanted even more to leave his parents' home. Everything there felt somehow artificial. His parents seemed not to hear him, or maybe they just didn't want to. Everything revolved around Donna and her children. Once every couple of months, she would argue with her husband and leave him. Then they all had to squeeze into a small house. The arguments lasted for 3 or 4 days. Then Donna would take the children and return home. Why live like this? Timoteo looked at her. But if you shout that you don't love him, then why live with him? So the children have a father, but that's ridiculous. You've painted the father of these children in such a bad light, and now you're trying to convince them that they need him. The guy was certain that such a situation would never happen in his own family. That's why he was looking for his one and only. Not to say that he was a monk or a recluse. He had been dating his classmate for almost 3 years, first love and all that. But then they grew up and one day they just parted ways. Then the guy fully immersed himself in studying. He wasn't drawn to parties or experiments, which young people are so fond of. Where have you been? The question caught him in the corridor. I needed your help. His father came out of the kitchen dissatisfied. From there, the nephews also ran out screaming. Timoteo sighed. He was already tired of these unbearable children. It would be one thing if Donna raised them a bit, but no, she was the perfect mother, so her sons were born perfect. As soon as Timoteo started explaining something to them or scolding them, his sister immediately pounced on him as if he were her worst enemy. Donna, but they should understand the word no, he tried to explain to her. But the woman didn't want to listen to anything. Her father, without saying what he wanted from him, went to his room. The pleasant sensations from meeting Luca quickly dissipated, and he immersed himself in his usual life. Behind the door, the children continued to squeal. No one made any remarks to them. Then there was a roar followed by Grandpa's scream. Everyone settled down for a few minutes, but moments later, it all started again. Oh Lord, when will I get out of this hell? Timoteo whispered. He lay on his bed, his hands under his head. Before him appeared Luke's face. She was smiling. Timoteo felt lighter in his soul. He liked the girl. He remembered the circumstances under which they first met and laughed. She saved me. His swollen lips formed a smile. Luca is protecting me now. The girl also returned home with strange feelings. Compared to Timoteo, Everything was fine for her. Her mother and father worked as engineers, wore large glasses, and were always immersed in their work. Honestly, they didn't care much about their daughter. Perhaps because of their lack of attention, the girl started doing karate, and since she had no brothers or sisters, it helped her a lot. Luca entered the entrance, stopped. An oppressive feeling seemed to envelop her. How I wish I could leave here, she sighed. Everything here seems frozen in the same position, darkness and emptiness. Hi, Mom. Dad, she greeted her parents. They responded to her, and each continued with their own business. Her father read the newspaper. He adhered to conservative views. Her mother was looking at something on her tablet. There's soup on the stove and fried fish in the pan, her mother said without looking away from the screen. Luca didn't feel hungry and walked into her room. Her mood completely dropped. It's like this isn't my life, she sighed. From 8 to 5, I'm at the bakery. Then it's either training or lessons. The same thing on weekends. Luke lay there, thinking about Timoteo. She felt like he was luckier in life than her. When she went to competitions, her life was bustling. She felt movement. But lately, Luca felt like she had retired. Yeah, I'm a karate pensioner, she smiled at her thoughts. Except no one pays me a pension. Her parents weren't particularly interested in their daughter's personal life, and for the most part, they didn't care. There were never any scandals or arguments in the girl's family, but Luca felt that this world had nothing to do with real harmony in life. The next day, Luca got up as usual at 6:00, did her half-hour practice, and started getting ready for work. There was no point in having breakfast at home, so she quickly changed and headed to the bus stop. Luca, the head pastry chef, approached her. The boss asked you to wait for him today, he said. He'll be here by 6. For heaven's sake, the girl cursed. He's really getting on my nerves with these delays, and he doesn't pay for overtime. It's outrageous. Who knows what's on his mind, Signora DEA sighed. Anyway, you'll have to stay today. Don't forget to switch everything off. Luke's mood was ruined from the early morning. She angrily threw butter into the mixer bowl, added powdered sugar, and pressed the button. I feel like I'm doing something wrong, a thought flashed through her mind. What does this mean? I really enjoy baking, but the working conditions are horrible. Essentially, we work until 6:00 or 7:00 in the evening. Sometimes the director keeps everyone until 8:00. No bonuses or overtime pay. He's terribly greedy. When Luca was hired here, she hoped to gain experience and become a master in a couple of years. But now, more and more often, she felt it would be better for her to leave. And where will I go, she thought. Other bakeries have even worse conditions, 12-hour shifts, night shifts. Luca was so absorbed in her work that she didn't notice time passing into the evening. Her colleagues started leaving for home. Luca cleared the table when the director appeared in the doorway. Good evening, he smiled happily. So, Lucita, how are you? I wanted to talk to you in front of everyone. Hello. Signor Luca, she greeted him without much friendliness. First of all, I want to thank you for your work. I really like how you handle things. And secondly, today I have good news for you. I would like to see you as the head pastry chef, naturally with a salary increase. Really, she rejoiced. Luca didn't even dream of hearing this. Do you really think I don't appreciate your hard work? The boss said contentedly. But for this, I would like to ask you something. What Luca didn't understand. Do you want to change my schedule? She immediately thought. No, Signor. Lucas approached her so closely that she got scared. Luca, can't you see how crazy I am about you? Are you out of your mind? She recoiled from him. This will never happen. Lucas quickly locked the door and, rubbing his hands, approached the girl. Enough already, although I do like when they resist. His eyes glinted. Don't come any closer. I'm warning you. Luke tried to stop him. I know how to fight. Signor Lucas was completely self-assured. Besides, no one at work knew that the girl was a professional in karate. In an instant, Luca grabbed the boss's hand and he found himself on the floor. He looked at her in astonishment, but his eyes quickly filled with rage. He jumped up and lunged at the girl. Luke lifted her leg high and struck him in the jaw. The boss recoiled. You monster. What have you done? He wiped the blood streaming from his nose. I'll get you now. He reached for a knife. Luca turned and in midair disarmed Signor Lucas. She stared him down. Stop, the girl commanded. Or I'll neutralize you right now. She extended her right hand forward. But the director was so enraged that nothing could stop him. He grabbed anything he could from the table and hurled it at Lucita. She deftly dodged. Lucas shouted profanities across the workshop, unlike anything the girl had ever heard in her life. Finally, he grabbed a long iron rod used to retrieve pastries from the oven. Luke dodged left and right. She seized the right moment and struck the necessary spot. Signor Lucas collapsed unconscious. The girl changed her clothes in about 10 minutes. The boss was supposed to come to his senses. She waited for him by the door. Oh, his groan was heard. My head. What did that do to me? He asked. Someone. Luca's voice reached him. If you had raped me just now, would that be nothing to you? But because I managed to resist, you immediately turned into the victim. Get out. So I never see you here again, she said. Weaklings like you always do that. You create the problem yourself and then look for someone else to blame. Lucita said goodbye and left. She walked away briskly, tears streaming down her cheeks. If not for her abilities, that bastard could have done anything to her. Now I hate. She stopped and burst into loud sobs. It was raining outside, which Luca didn't even notice. The girl walked slowly. Nothing caught her attention. She was in pain. In the eyes of her former boss, she was nothing more than an object. He saw no value in her except to satisfy his physical needs. Lord, do people like him not see from the outside how insignificant and primitive they are, she thought. He has everything: the big house, an expensive car, his own business. Yet he's like a zombie. He has neither intelligence nor heart. What does he even need all this for? Unexpectedly, her phone rang, and Luca startled. She really didn't want to talk to anyone, but she answered anyway. "Hello, Timoteo." Her voice sounded hoarse. Luca remained silent for a few minutes, but then couldn't hold back and burst into tears. "Lucita, what happened?" he asked anxiously. "Where are you?" "At home, Lucita. Let's meet up." "Okay." She agreed and told him approximately where she was. Luca was sitting on some pipe near a small stall when a taxi pulled up and Timoteo stepped out. "Lucita," he rushed over to her. "Are you okay?" He looked deeply into her eyes. "I'm all right now," she calmly replied. "Do you want to know what happened to me? My boss almost assaulted me. And if it weren't for my karate skills, it definitely would have happened." "That bastard," Timoteo cursed, clenching his fists. "I'll talk to him." "Timoteo, thank you," she stopped him. "He won't come to his senses anytime soon. I beat him up." The young couple started walking towards the center. Timoteo wanted to support her somehow. "So now I'm out of a job," she lowered her head. "I don't know what to do now. He probably won't pay me." "Luca, why don't you try on your own?" he suggested. "You know, I was scared when I started everything myself. We have this idea in our heads that someone has to organize and lead us, but why can't we do it ourselves? Let's say you have that opportunity. What would you specifically like to do well?" "Probably cakes," she answered immediately. "Not small stuff like pastries. You know, I like decorating." "Signora DEA says I'm pretty good at it now. Let's think this through together. Besides weddings, what other events do people usually order cakes for?" Timoteo tried to lead Luca to the main point. "Well, anniversaries, birthdays, various holidays, and sometimes just because someone feels like having a cake." Luca chuckled for the first time since the stress. "Listen, let's print some flyers and distribute them in the busiest places." Timoteo was enthusiastic. "I'd bet on children's centers. They're always celebrating something." "Great idea," she replied. "Timoteo, thank you so much for your support. If it weren't for you," she paused. On their way, the friends discussed all the issues that came to their minds. Everything seemed fine. But the next day, Luca received a phone call. "Lucita," Tabar's voice said formally. "Please come to the police station to discuss a matter." Senior Lucas turned out to be no gentleman. He filed a complaint against Luca, listing injuries including a split lip and bruise on his chin. "Then I will file a counter-complaint. He tried to assault me," the girl responded. A fierce battle ensued for almost a week. Lucas used all his connections, but nothing helped. Timoteo also testified as a witness, confirming that he met Lucita after the incident and she told him everything. "He turned out to be even worse than I thought," she told Timoteo in shock. "He reported me to the police over a bruise." God, how much of a monster can one be? The young people quickly regained their composure and started organizing Luca's first orders. "Luca, take this." The guy handed her a small stack of money. "You need some starting capital, at least to buy the necessary supplies." "Timoteo, I'm sorry, but I can't take this." She immediately refused. "I'll borrow from my parents." "Doesn't matter. Then borrow from me. I won't demand it back or remind you," he suggested. It was a very good offer. After Luca explained everything to her parents, they reluctantly accepted that she had been fired from her job. "Well, what will you do now?" her father asked discontentedly. "Luca, you're already an adult." "Dad, I'll be making cakes at home," she tried to reassure him. "I'm already looking for orders." "Luca, what can we possibly do in our kitchen?" Her mother peered over her glasses disapprovingly. "There's barely enough space to move around." It was fortunate for Lucita that at that moment, she had a friend who supported her. Under the disapproving gazes of her parents, Luca might have given up immediately. But Timoteo became that breath of fresh air that prevented her from suffocating in the emptiness of living with her father and mother. And then, a miracle happened. The girl got her first order. Luca was so nervous that she couldn't sleep that night. She waited until morning when the cake was picked up. Timoteo turned out to be very insightful in this matter. The children's market turned out to be the most promising. Despite making cakes for all kinds of occasions, children's cakes made up about 70% of all her orders. Another important event occurred. Just as Timoteo inspired Lucita, she also inspired him. "Oh my God, no way," Timoteo shouted, grabbing his head. "They hired me." He dashed out of the house and ran around the yard. There was a bit of snow on the street, and he scooped some up to wipe his face, squealing from the cold. "Yes, I did it," he yelled into the distance. It worked out. He couldn't believe his luck. That same evening, Timoteo invited Lucita to dinner. Despite having orders, she managed to make time for it. "Don't worry, I still have the whole night ahead of me," the girl laughed. "Besides, I have karate practice later today." "Luke, How do you manage everything? Do you ever sleep? Timoteo's voice sounded amazed over the phone. You're incredible. The young people were sitting in a cozy cafe. Timoteo couldn't stop talking. He was bursting to share. And then they gave me a second task, he blurted out. I look at it and realize I have no idea how to do it. Can you imagine? I'm in shock. My hand reaches to close it all, and then it hit me. I thought, let me try to approach it from another angle. 3 days later, they came back saying they liked my original solution. I still don't understand what happened. My head was spinning. I kept reading, and there was a link to the third round. Shaking, I clicked it and realized it was over for me. I don't even remember what I wrote there. Anyway, I hit send. That was it. I knew I didn't really understand the topic, so I forgot about it for a week. Didn't even check my email to avoid disappointment. Usually the reply is thank you for participating. It was a pleasure, but then something made me check. I opened it, and it says, there is no solution to the task you received. Oh my God, I was in shock. But we thought it reasonable to consider it from the angle you attempted. If you don't mind, we're ready to take you into our team. Timoteo jumped up from his chair, and Lucita burst out laughing loudly. Timoteo was like a big child, but she loved that about him. His eyes sparkled with enthusiasm as he spoke. You know what's interesting? It turns out their tasks either have multiple solutions or none at all. They're looking for people who can think creatively, step outside the box of conventional thinking, the young man excitedly remarked. They walked home in silence. Timoteo wasn't thinking about his new job anymore. He kept glancing at Lucita. You know, since you came into my life, everything has been changing for the better, he said, taking her hand. First and for me too. Luke looked into his eyes. Timoteo, it's like I found myself. I want this to never end. He touched her face. I love you. Despite the enthusiasm of the young couple, both sets of parents were rather cold towards Timoteo and Luke's marriage. So where are you planning to live? His mother asked, hands on her hips. We don't have space. Go to her parents' place. Why do we need to live with anyone? Her son retorted immediately. We'll rent a place. Oh yes, now you're all rich with your salary. You can do anything, his mother added discontentedly. You didn't even think about us or about Dona's children. Mom, you talk as if I just stumbled upon this money, Timoteo said, offended. You know the strict rules. If something's wrong, you're out. It's an international company. There's no room for slacking off. Fine, she sighed. I don't understand your job, but I know one thing. You'll spend all your money on her now, and you'll quickly forget what your father and Dona did for you. What does she have to do with anything? Her son looked at her in surprise. Your Dona never gave me a penny. She sacrificed her education for you, the woman insisted. If not for you, Dona would have definitely finished college. Enough of your lies. Timoteo couldn't hold back and stormed out of the house. Dona was always lazy. She just dreamed of marrying Will so someone could support her, and she had brainless kids so her husband wouldn't leave her. Idiot. Lucita faced a similar interrogation at Timoteo's parents' place. His mother immediately suggested, no, we'll be living on our own, she said with a serious expression. We'll rent a place. Well, no way, his mother protested immediately. The three of us are already squeezed in here. I was just kidding. The daughter wanted to test her parents. She had expected this exact reaction. It hurt her deeply, but now she was starting her own family. It was time to let her parents live as they wanted, undisturbed. The registration was very modest. Timoteo and Lucita hosted an evening for their parents and a few friends. The young couple had no intentions of flaunting their wealth. They were planning to rent an apartment. Luca, how about this one? Timoteo showed her a beautiful photograph. It has a huge kitchen, perfect for you, Timoteo. The girl looked at the price and gasped. It's very expensive. Besides, I'm just starting out. We need to save up some money. Maybe we can get something on mortgage. Luca, expensive isn't the issue. We need something that works for both of us, Timoteo countered. Here, 2 spacious rooms and a luxurious kitchen. I can work quietly while you're busy with your stuff. In the end, they did rent that apartment, something Lucita would later be very glad about. Each of the newlyweds immersed themselves in their work. Everything was going well for them until Timoteo's older sister got divorced. What does it have to do with me? The guy argued with his mother over the phone. I left your house, so leave me alone. His mother wanted to make him feel guilty so that, in her understanding, he would start supporting Dona financially. His sister lived with their parents and didn't want to work. They were already supporting her children. I'm stressed, she sobbed to her father and mother. Let me get myself together. He left me, that bastard. The situation with Dona was as messy as Dona herself. She kept changing her mind about filing for divorce, sometimes waking up in the morning wanting to forgive her husband and make amends. The parents tried their hardest to involve their son in this whole story, but Timoteo managed to avoid it until almost half a year passed, when he finally went to visit them and had a final argument. I don't need your share of the house. Tomorrow I'm going to the notary to renounce it. Let everything go to Yona, just leave me alone, he yelled. Don't you dare raise your voice in my house, the father demonstrated who was in charge. We don't need anything from you, but from this moment I don't want to see you here anymore. If you don't want to help us and your sister, that's between you and God, but don't count on us anymore either. I'm not asking anything of you, his son tried to reason with him. I'm not bothering you at all. It's your calls and fabricated stories about Donna's kids having nothing to eat that bothered me. And yet, I see those kids are well fed. Their cheeks are practically hanging off their chests. Don't you dare insult my sons, Donna screeched, as sharp as a knife. Get out of here. This is my house. Timoteo looked at her in complete bewilderment. He had lived with these people for so many years. Madhouse, Timoteo cursed and walked out of the house. A madhouse. Go on, get lost. Don't arrest out onto the street. You're no longer my brother, and you will never see your nephews again. I wasn't exactly keen on that, Timoteo muttered and headed down the street. After moving out from his parents, his life took a completely different course. Timoteo couldn't understand how he had managed to live with them for so long. None of them were ever ready for dialogue or discussion. Each of them was always standing their ground. I'm always right, his father loved to repeat. I never make mistakes, he'd pound the table with his fist. Everything his father did in his life turned out to be the worst choices. How can he see that, Timoteo thought. The young man remembered how his father had been guaranteed a good position at the factory, but he went on some principle and ruined everything. Then went on to blame it all on Pedro. There were many such examples. When his father wanted to buy a car, even Timoteo, who knew nothing about cars, told him it didn't look very good, but his father insisted. As a result, 3 months later, it needed major repairs that cost so much it could have bought a very good car. In total, his mother was even worse. When she argued with his father, the roof was blown off the house. Both of them were so scandalous that one scandal wasn't enough for them. Such arguments could go on for 3 days. Of course, everyone suffered from them, but they didn't care. Time passed and Timoteo breathed freely. In such matters, both his mother and father were principled people. No one called or spoke to him anymore. Occasionally, rumors would reach him that he was an ungrateful son. Luca's parents also called her from time to time with little interest, so the young couple were left entirely to themselves. Luca stopped giving private karate lessons. Orders for cakes were pouring in, but she still made time for her training twice a week. Timoteo had gotten used to her morning exercises. Sometimes he even tried to join in. They both cherished those moments. Timoteo couldn't quite keep up, and they would roll around on the floor laughing about their attempts to show off their abs. No, oh Luca, her husband tried to interrupt her laughter. One athlete in our family is enough. Timoteo usually retreated to his room and wasn't seen for about 3 hours. Then Luca would prepare a quick dinner, and afterward, each of them would continue with their own tasks. Almost a year passed. The spouses were constantly busy with work. Luca returned tired from her training. She had no more appointments today and wanted to talk to her husband. Timoteo, how are you? She approached him. Her husband was completely absorbed in his computer and didn't quite grasp what she was saying. Lucita, can I have another 10 minutes? And I'll be done, he smiled. Please start dinner in the meantime. I'm absolutely starving. They sat at the table and lively discussed something. Each of them recounted how their day had gone. Timoteo, let's decide on the housing. His wife looked at him. She hesitated and looked down. I want to have a baby, Lucita. Timoteo jumped up to her. I'm all for it. Let's start planning today. Timoteo, can we afford to buy an apartment now? She asked softly. If I get pregnant, I won't be able to work as much as I do now, and I don't want to live in a rented place on your salary alone. Well, let's calculate, he thought seriously. The money we have right now definitely won't be enough. We'll have to take out a loan, Luca. I don't want to buy some rundown apartment and then invest a couple million more into it. I'd rather buy a good one right away. I wouldn't want to take out a loan, his wife sighed, and we have no one to borrow such money from. Yeah, no one will lend us that much. One thought came to Timoteo's mind. You know, a few days ago I was offered a very good project worth $500,000, he began. But I'm so busy right now that I just couldn't take it on myself. But if I could find a good person, even a newbie, we could split it 50-50. It would be really good money for a beginner. Do you have someone in mind for that? Lucita asked with interest. I need to think about it. Timoteo looked out the window. I think we could make something happen in that direction, Timoteo. I could try something too, his wife chimed in. What if I hire an assistant? Lately, I've had to turn down new clients. It's a loss of income. That's a good idea too. It benefits both the person who earns and you, Timoteo agreed. Especially with Christmas coming up. It'll be non-stop festivities a week later. Both Luca and Timoteo found assistants for themselves, and their businesses surged with renewed vigor. By early May, they had managed together to save almost the entire amount for the apartment they wanted. The final step remained. Dear God, did we really do it? Luca cried tears of joy as they entered their new apartment. Timoteo, thank you. My love, she hugged her husband tightly. I'm so incredibly happy. And thank you too, he kissed his wife. We did this together. Now we can start thinking about children, but that wasn't the end of it. As soon as Timoteo's parents and sister heard that they had bought their own apartment, They became upset. We need to do something, his wife pressed on him. I'm tired of Donna and the grandchildren. Maro, say something, Elvita. What can I say? He was angry. He wrote a renunciation of inheritance. Everything will go to Donna. I don't want to support her anymore. Can't you understand? She threw angrily. I'm not made of iron. Let her do something in her life herself. Why didn't you tell her that marrying well was the most important thing? Father burst out in rage. Elvita, she's your creation, like you always told me. Stay out of it. I know how to talk to my daughter. There. That's settled. Raised a good for nothing. And now bear with it. Timoteo spat. At least he grew up smart. This one he spat again. Complete fool. Don't you dare call our daughter that. His wife immediately bristled. And where is your Timoteo, huh? He hasn't spoken to you in almost 2 years. Didn't you forbid him from coming here? That's it. Leave me alone. Her husband stood up from the table. I'm tired of your nonsense. It's this, then it's that. I swear I'll leave home, just like Timoteo. Go ahead. No one's keeping you here. His wife opened her mouth. Do you think I can't manage without you? Yeah, like you're the only one who can set a bowl of borscht on the table. With that, it was pointless to talk to his wife in the evening. When Donna picked up the children from daycare, her mother approached her daughter. Let's have a serious talk, she calmly said. Donna, you're a grown woman. Sure, he betrayed you, her mother cursed, but life doesn't end there. Listen to me. Find someone else. There are plenty of decent men. I can't forget him. Donna made a pained expression. He's the father of my children. Daughter, don't miss your chance while you're still young, her mother advised seriously. Look, find yourself a good man. He might even be divorced. What difference does it make if he has a place to live, a car, maybe even money? Donna wasn't as clever as her mother. She didn't understand where her mother was heading. She burst into tears. Of course she wanted to remarry, but not just to any man. She wanted someone wealthy. Donna, understand that with 2 kids, a millionaire won't likely take you. Her mother cautiously tried to dissuade her. Just look around. There are plenty of men with their own homes. You're right, sighed the daughter. I can't survive on just child support, and even that mine pays at the minimum wage. What can you buy with that? And I've been telling you the same, agreed Senora Elvira. So get searching. Once you find the right match, you'll move in with him. You both can come to us on weekends and holidays. Donna didn't tell her mother, but she had been hanging around a dating site for a long time. She wasn't lacking in male attention. After divorcing her husband, she had already had 2 small romances, but she didn't know how her parents would react if she decided to remarry. Now that question was resolved for her. Hugo was a real looker. Donna immediately noticed him. Their first meeting happened a few days after the conversation with her mother. The man, with a slight Caucasian accent, showered her with compliments. Donna smiled contentedly. She herself wasn't badly looking. We would look good together, she dreamed. Her desires separated from her mind and carried her somewhere far away. Donna, I have a modest 2-story house, Hugo said, saying you go like a nightingale. Have you seen how my neighbors live? They all have 3 stories, but I'm not claiming leadership. Is that really your house? Donna leaned forward on her chair. Hugo, so you live there alone? Well, not alone, he replied immediately. My parents are there for now. They're getting old, so I took them in. I can't just abandon them in their old age. Well, you're a good son, unlike my brother who doesn't care about our mother or father. Donna wiped imaginary tears. Can you imagine? We did so much for him, and as soon as he got rich, he disowned us. God sees everything. Donna, he raised his index finger upwards. I swear he'll be punished for that. Don't just rush home. Hugo was her dream. He seemed intelligent and wise to her, and most importantly, he had a 2-story house, an expensive car, and his own business. Mom, I won't let him slip away, Donna told her about her new beau. Hugo is such a... She closed her eyes in pleasure. He'll love my boys. I think I'm in love with him. A couple of days later, something happened between Donna and Hugo, and they were already able to start planning their family. Is this your business? Donna looked in horror at the small stand with greens. Hugo, but you said you have a shop. Of course, a shop, he chuckled. What did you think this was? A dry cleaner. You know how much money I make from this, he whispered in her ear. Really? The woman gasped in amazement, her mouth wide open. Quite a bit, but I'm not going to tell you everything in front of everyone. Hugo smiled. So don't judge just because I have only 1 table, but it's a golden table. It brings me so much clean profit that no one could even dream of. Donna didn't question how someone could earn a fortune from bunches of parsley and dill. Such questions didn't bother her back then. What if he doesn't have just 1 spot, but many? Her mother guessed. He won't reveal all his secrets right away. If he has 10 such places all over town, my goodness, he's a millionaire. Senora Elvira really liked Hugo, or rather the prospects he could bring to them. If Donna marries him, Maro and I will be set for life too, she dreamed. We need to invite him over urgently, otherwise he'll definitely leave us. Meanwhile, Donna decided not to reveal her cards to her husband and didn't mention the surprise that awaited him. Soon it was Saturday. A stranger knocked on the gate. Donna, all dolled up, rushed to greet him. Hugo, the guest, extended his hand to the homeowner. "I'm your daughter Dona's friend, Senor Mero," he said. He shook hands with surprise as the man kept glancing at his wife, who was smiling contentedly. The guest sat down with the hosts and kept telling stories. Everyone listened with their mouths wide open, and then he pulls out a pistol, trying to scare me, so I just bam knocked it out of his hand. Hugo laughed. They still couldn't believe him. "What martial art do you practice?" Dona's mother asked with interest. "Our daughter-in-law is a karateka." "Oh, come on," Hugo waved his hand dismissively. "Can women fight like men?" "That's just for show. I do freestyle wrestling. I'm a two-time champion of Spain." He proudly tapped his chest. Senora Elvira was overjoyed, on cloud nine. She had finally managed to settle her daughter, and they themselves would be well off too with such a son-in-law. They could live quite comfortably. In her mind, she was already calculating the profit they would get from just one of his spots. In her understanding, a son-in-law should give them something nice as well. "Mom, I'm so happy." Dona hugged her mother that evening. "Did you see the rings he has on his fingers? Pure gold. Each stone must be 5 carats." That night, Elvira couldn't sleep. Bills of various denominations kept flashing before her eyes. "We didn't invest so much money in Dona for nothing," she praised herself. "These are the fruits we sowed. Well, finally Mero will get a decent car. I'll ask Hugo for a Mercedes right away. He won't refuse his dear mother-in-law." She chuckled to herself. "He's a suspicious guy." Thoughts swirled in Mero's mind. "He talks so much that you want to listen endlessly. I don't like him. My heart senses that Dona will get into trouble with him. He talks about being rich, but he came to us by bus. Something's not right here." The next day, Mero wanted to talk to his wife. She didn't even bother to listen. "What? Are you crazy?" She waved her hands in front of his face. "Dona is going to marry a wealthy man after all." "Elvira, think about it yourself." Mero tried to speak seriously. "If he's so rich, why didn't he come here in his Lexus? He came by bus and back in a taxi. Something doesn't add up." "Leave it," the wife grumbled. "For once in your life, it makes you wrong. You kept saying Dona wouldn't marry again." Hugo often visited Dona. Mero was always bothered that he came empty-handed. Couldn't he bring even one flower for Dona? Just one rose, he complained to his wife, who paid him no attention. It seemed like Hugo heard his complaint because one day he arrived with a huge bouquet of roses. True, they were slightly crumpled, but it was something. "Well, what do you say now?" Senora Elvira, Mero asked. "You can only give one little rose while Hugo showers us with noble gifts. He's a serious man." Then came the day when this serious man agreed to stay overnight at their place. "Unfortunately, I can't sell the house yet," he sighed. "My older sister will take our parents at the end of summer, so Dona and I will have to wait. Besides, I don't want to leave here. I have a big business, and you're nearby. Dona will miss you a lot in Barcelona. I know that city. The sea there is only pleasant in summer, but when autumn and winter come, it's not as warm anymore." "Then stay with us tonight," Dona unexpectedly suggested. "Mom and Dad don't mind." Senor Mero gave his daughter such a stern look that she even flinched. "Yes, I'm all for it. I'll be glad." Hugo agreed immediately. Besides, now we are one big family. 2 weeks later, Dona's parents were horrified to discover that their new son-in-law had moved his things in and was now living with them. "Well, let's wait until the end of summer," Senor Elvira replied without much enthusiasm. "Then Hugo will sell his house in Barcelona and buy a 2-story one in the city center here." Her husband remained silent. He was very displeased with everything that was happening. Events were unfolding in such a way that Hugo felt completely at home with them. Another 2 weeks passed, and the household members began to notice how Hugo wasn't in a hurry to go to work. The man loved to sleep in. Dona ran around him, bringing breakfast or lunch to bed. "Oh, I have pancreatic problems," the son-in-law once said. "Sometimes it hits me so hard that I spend a couple of months in bed." The day finally came, and Senor Mero couldn't take it anymore. He grabbed his wife's hand and dragged her into a room. "What's going on here?" He was furious. "Either you get rid of this bum from our house or I will." Mero hissed the wife. "But I asked you to wait until the end of summer. Hugo will sort out his affairs soon. Your Hugo has already worn out his welcome for me. I haven't spoken to Timoteo over some triviality, and now some freeloader has taken over my territory, doing nothing but eating." He raged. "Don't forget that this is also my home. Hugo lives on my territory." Senora Elvina resisted. "Aren't you willing to endure this for our daughter's happiness?" "I'm not even sure he's capable of making Dona happy. He's just here to settle comfortably. He has no house, no Lexus, nothing." He spat and stormed out of the room. "Idiot, how can she be such a dumb? It's obvious that Hugo just wanted to settle well. He has no home, no Lexus." Senor Mero thought for the first time, feeling like a real fool. He realized clearly that all these years he had danced to his wife's tune. "The only worthy person in our family was Timoteo. Because of her, I quarreled with my son," he regretted. "I would give anything to reconcile with him again." But Senora Elvina had a completely different opinion. She was not going to back down. The mother took matters into her own hands. "Hugo, how are things with the house?" she asked her son-in-law one day. "You know, we might sell our house. We want to move to the countryside. The city has become tiresome." "Oh, I don't mind," the man smiled. "To the countryside, then." Senora Elvina's mouth fell open in surprise. "But aren't you planning to sell your house in Barcelona? Where will you and Donna live?" "Well, first we'll all move to the countryside together, and then we'll buy our own house," Hugo replied contentedly. "I want our homes to be on the same street. We can't do without you." "Well, all right then," the woman replied without enthusiasm. "We'll wait." But a month later, Senora Elvina's patience wore thin. She decided to talk to her daughter. "Donna, your father and I have done everything for you. Until Hugo buys you a house, you'll have to rent an apartment," she said seriously. "What?" Donna snapped angrily. "Mom, are you kicking us out just now that I've met the man of my dreams?" "Donna, it's one thing if your dream man worked and brought home money." Elvina couldn't hold back. "I'm tired of feeding your Hugo. He has a business after all. Why can't he even buy a loaf of bread for home?" "Mom, we didn't want to tell you," she hesitated, "but Hugo's entire business was taken away from him. There have been legal disputes for 2 months now. He just needs a place to wait it out. He has connections in the FSSB, so he's been staying home all the time. He'll get everything back. It just takes time." Senora Elvina sighed. Somehow she didn't quite believe this whole story, but things couldn't continue like this either. The woman began to plan how to get rid of Donna and her lover. She didn't discuss this topic with her husband, and he didn't want to. There's no other way. One thought came to her mind. "I can't take this anymore. He should help her in some way too. They should have a conscience. They can't just keep burdening their parents." She tried to justify herself again. The operation was scheduled for Thursday evening, and once again, Senora Elvina didn't tell her husband anything, but she explained the situation to her daughter. "Donna, your father wants either to shoot your Hugo or to put him in jail. You need to live somewhere else for now. I'll help you." She told her about her cunning plan. "Where are you going?" Senor Moreau asked without much interest as his wife Donna, with the kids and the newly minted son-in-law, were leaving the house. "Oh, just going to the city for a walk," Elvina smiled. At 7:00 in the evening, he was surprised but didn't press for details. He didn't really care. They all barely fit into the taxi and headed to the address that Senora Elvina managed to obtain. According to the information, it was supposed to be a reliable place. All participants had rehearsed their roles at home, so Donna's mother was confident that everything would work out perfectly. "Luca, I'll quickly run to the store." Her husband peeked into the kitchen. "Seems like my headphones are acting up." "Okay," she replied, and continued with her tasks. Clara, her assistant, had left early today. Luca was so engrossed in her work that she lost track of time. She particularly enjoyed making flowers. Today there were 3 cakes for children that she and Clara had already finished, and 1 for an anniversary, which Luca was currently working on. She tried not to overload Tuesdays and Fridays when she had training, but on other days they worked full tilt. Luca was so absorbed in her work that, when the doorbell rang, she almost dropped the syringe from her hands. "Oh God, who could that be?" she muttered irritably. Luca wasn't expecting anyone. Her husband had taken the keys, and he couldn't call. The hostess opened the door and almost screamed in surprise. A real group stood near the door. "Lucita, we're here," her mother-in-law announced. "On business." "May we come in?" She smiled brightly. "Please come in," her daughter-in-law said in astonishment. "Come into the room, please." "I'm working in the kitchen." Donna admired her brother's apartment with undisguised delight. She complimented him on it several times. "Where's Timoteo?" her mother asked. "We wanted to talk to both of you." "Well, never mind," Donna said. "We'll tell him later." About what? Lucita asked in confusion. Her hand sweated under the gloves. "Lucita, I want to inform you that Donna and her family will be living with you until the end of the summer," Senora Elvina said in a gentle voice. "We've denied our daughter everything to give Timoteo a good education. Now it's time for her to help. It's Timoteo's direct responsibility." "What do you mean they'll be living here?" her daughter-in-law asked in shock. "Firstly, this is our shared apartment, but half belongs to my son, so Donna and her family will live here," Senora Elvina said, either being silly or really acting that way. Luca grabbed her phone and called her husband, but he inconveniently didn't answer. The young woman decided to take action herself. "Thank you for the visit," she coldly smiled. "But I can't keep you any longer." "No worries, we're not in a hurry. We'll wait for Timoteo," her mother-in-law smiled back. "After all, we're on his half," she added. "Get out quickly." Luke struggled to keep her composure. "How dare you come here?" "I'm calling the police right now." She grabbed her phone. "You have 2 minutes. Senora Elvina hesitated but then approached her daughter-in-law, her eyes burning with hatred. "You think you can live off my son, fool? I'll show you. You'll be out of here in 3 days. And remember, this is my son's apartment, and my daughter will live here. Do you understand me?" she yelled like a madwoman. "Get out of here," her daughter-in-law replied dryly. "Neither you nor your daughter will ever set foot in our apartment again." The guests left. Luca was very nervous. She couldn't reach him. She quickly rushed out of the entrance. Next to them was a notary's office. She headed there. As soon as Luca entered the office, everything slowly started to blur before her eyes. The girl asked her question. "What nonsense," came the distant response. "None of them has any right to your apartment. God forbid if something happened to your husband. In that case, too, they probably wouldn't get anything." Lucita collapsed to the floor and sank into something soft. She came to her senses when a doctor was examining her. Somewhere in the distance, Timoteo's voice could be heard. "How are you?" The doctor patted her cheeks. "Feeling better?" Luca barely nodded. "Luca, what happened?" Her husband fretted in front of her. "For God's sake, just tell us what's wrong." Her blood pressure dropped sharply. "You'll know the rest after the tests," the paramedic replied. "I've given her an injection. She'll be able to walk in 10 minutes. Luca lay on the couch, exhausted. She still needed to finish the cake, but she didn't know how to tell her husband everything. "Timoteo, your mother and her whole gang came over," she said quietly. "She wanted Donna and her new husband to live with us and demanded that I give her your half of the apartment." "What?" he exclaimed. "Has she completely lost her mind?" "No. These idiots can't live peacefully. If we don't interfere in their lives, they feel sick without us." The doorbell rang again. Timoteo rushed to the door, eager to confront his relatives. "Ah, and here you are now. They've sent you," he shouted at his father. "Get out. I don't want to see you." Signor Marlowe wasn't prepared for such a reception. He had no idea his wife had been there before. "Timoteo, forgive me." He hung his head and headed towards the elevator. His son looked at him in bewilderment. "Dad, wait." He rushed after him. "What's going on? Have you all gone crazy?" Timoteo ushered his father into the apartment. They sat in the adjacent room and talked. "I was wrong. I listened to your mother." His father nervously fiddled with his hands. "Timoteo, I can't be without you. I need you." Tears streamed down his cheeks. "You are the best thing I've ever created in my life." His son embraced him, and they both cried for about 30 minutes. "I've missed you so much all this time too," he said as he wiped tears from his father's eyes. "I love you very much, and I'm proud to have a father like you. You taught me to admit my mistakes." Signor Marlowe smiled. Luca quickly came to herself. She was glad that Timoteo and his father had reconciled. She knew he had suffered without communicating with him. Timoteo's mother wasn't as much of a concern to her. She had always been self-centered. But Timoteo always felt that his father had potential. Despite the incident, it was the happiest day in Timoteo's life. The first reason was his father, and the second, "Well, get ready." The doctor said, "I bet you're having a boy." Luca nearly jumped off the couch. She had no idea she was pregnant at all. "Are you sure?" she asked. The doctor turned out to be a joker. "Well, I'm only sure that I had nothing to do with it." His cheerful laughter filled the room. "Sure thing. Mom, from this moment on, take good care of yourself." Luca didn't even know how to tell her husband about it. She was so happy that she could hardly breathe. She went into the baby store and bought tiny booties. She wanted to tell Timoteo about everything this way. "Luca, you're back already." Her husband's voice came from his room. "I'll be there in a minute." His wife hid in the adjacent room. There was a light creak, and Timoteo appeared in the kitchen. He didn't notice the table right away. He was heading to another room when his peripheral vision caught something lying there. He approached and was stunned. "Luca, you are pregnant," he exclaimed loudly through the apartment. "Wow, that's news. Come here," he said as he scooped her up in his arms. Timoteo was incredibly happy. Everything he wanted in life had come true. Signor Marlowe came home. He pretended not to know anything about his wife's plan. She didn't talk to him much either. 2 days later, there was a loud knock. Someone was demanding to come in insistently. Signora Elvina came out at the noise. There was a car outside, and a woman was spinning around it. "Can I come in?" she asked. She quickly pushed the hostess aside and barged into the house. "Where is he?" she yelled throughout the house. "Get out, you bastard. Who are you?" Donna emerged from her room. "What do you want here?" She couldn't believe what was happening. "What do I want?" the stranger yelled with a strong accent. "Not what, but who. Where is that bastard Abdullah? Come out now. I'll show you." Signor Marlowe stood by and watched what was happening. In principle, this was what he expected. "Get out of here!" Signora Elvina burst into the house. "Who are you?" "I'll call the police right now. I'm this scum's wife," the guest shouted angrily. "How is it going here?" "Thought I wouldn't find out. He's gone to earn money for kids starving at home, and he's having fun here." "How?" "4 kids, Donna defended her lover. "He's divorced. Hugo lives in Barcelona." "Forget about Barcelona. He barely bought a house for the kids' child support. And that's in the middle of nowhere." She grabbed her husband by the hair. "I'll show you." Hugo, or rather Abdullah, started shouting something in an unfamiliar language, but the woman yelled even louder, "Pack your things and get out." Signor Marlowe told the former son-in-law, "I think it's better for you to sort this out at home." Hugo angrily stuffed his things into a bag and kept shouting. His wife stood nearby, watching him closely. Donna and Signora Elvina were at odds. Finally, 2 bags were packed to the brim, and the wife chased her irresponsible husband out the door. Everyone was in shock. So interrupted the homeowner after a silence. From now on, Donna, if you want to live here, you'll have to work. There shouldn't be any of your suitors in my house. The man looked around to make sure he was understood. God forbid if I find out any of you went to Timoteo with complaints again. I'll kick you out the same day. This applies to everyone. He turned and left for his room. Everything fell into place, and the wife and daughter didn't speak about anything else. Despite such a defeat, Signora Elvina never admitted it. She stubbornly insisted she had done everything right. This was her way of trying to secure her daughter's happiness. Her husband no longer tried to persuade her. He simply lived his own life. He often visited his son and looked after his grandchildren. Donna, despite supposedly raising 2 sons, had to go to work. This was very difficult for her. She wasn't used to it. Initially, her husband supported her, then her parents, but even Elvina had to admit that Donna could no longer rely on her. Her father categorically refused to give her any money. Even if your children end up in a children's home, I won't be responsible for them. It's your duty. What were you thinking when you had them? That everyone would do everything for you? That's not how it works, Signor Mauro once told her. Donna quickly calmed down. She still tried to arrange her life in hopes of finding a well-off husband, but no one wanted her. There were also changes in how the children were raised. They need to learn the word no, her father once told her. I won't tolerate disorder in my house anymore. If you're going to live here, please teach your children some basic understanding. If they don't improve, I'll start disciplining them. Donna's arrogance quickly faded. She no longer shouted at her children. They were the best. Finally, the woman came down from her pedestal. Timoteo and Lucita continued their work, bringing happiness and benefit to others. Luca even managed to pursue her favorite hobby with the children. They now had 3, a son and 2 daughters.